Hello, my name is Aoife. I'm a weight inclusive dietitian. I work with people to help to truly heal their relationship with food and their body, and I also work with people following weight loss surgery to do the same thing. Today we're going to be talking about dumping syndrome. This is something that if you're thinking about having bariatric surgery, or if you've had bariatric surgery, you probably will have come across this term. And the reason that I'm talking about dumping syndrome today is particularly because of the psychological impact that the promise of dumping syndrome and resultant weight loss. You know, if you get dumping syndrome, this is another great way to restrict the amount you're eating, because you'll feel so terrible, you know, whether it's running to the bathroom, needing to lie down urgently and staying there, you will feel so awful that you will never eat that food again. That is quite a loaded promise with quite drastic symptoms and side effects. So in today's video, I want to discuss what dumping syndrome is, the psychological impact of it being the promise or key to weight loss, and also a couple of tips about what to do if you're experiencing dumping syndrome. Please pause the screen for disclaimers, and today's video includes talk of weight loss surgery. Dumping syndrome includes the rapid movement of food from the stomach into the bowel. And this movement, this rapid movement, also comes alongside rapid fluid shifts, so fluid changes, and hormone imbalances and imbalanced hormone responses. And this is all specifically related to how food is moving through the gut. Dumping syndrome, in terms of bariatric surgery, is more likely to occur in people who have had a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. And this is because, in comparison to the gastric sleeve, for example, in the gastric sleeve, it is primarily the stomach which is operated on, and most of the bowel is left untouched. However, when it comes to the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, part of your bowel is bypassed, hence the name. This means that your small bowel is shorter than what it would have been before. And in some cases, this results in that rapid movement from food in the stomach into the bowel, the small bowel. It is estimated that this kind of dumping syndrome occurs in up to 50% of people who have had a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. Some people experience dumping syndrome in the early days following surgery, whether that's a few weeks or a few months following surgery, and then it subsides. Other people may experience dumping syndrome lifelong following surgery to their stomach or gut, like bariatric surgery. And it's estimated that between 1 to 5% of people following this surgery experience dumping syndrome to an extent which it is considered debilitating. When we're looking at the symptoms of dumping syndrome, you know, it varies from person to person, but it tends to fall under two categories. The first category is GI, gastrointestinal, that's your digestive tract. And then the second category is your vasomotor, so think your veins in your blood circulatory system. Let's have a look into the types of symptoms that can occur within the GI tract. Some people may experience early fullness, some people may experience nausea, and some people report heaving or feeling the need to bring food back up. People also may experience vomiting, they may experience urgent explosive diarrhea, and they also may experience cramping, bloating, and abdominal pain. Not pleasant. In terms of the vasomotor or circulatory symptoms, these can include things like feeling faint, feeling dizzy, feeling an intense urge to lie down. People also experience flushing and palpitations. For people who experience dumping syndrome, these kind of symptoms can occur in response to a variety of different foods. They tend to occur in response to carbohydrate foods, especially carbohydrate foods which move through the digestive system a little bit quicker, also your dairy products as well. Some people who have had bariatric surgery experience dumping-like symptoms in response to fatty foods, and this is a valid experience. However, it is slightly different from dumping syndrome. And when it comes to the frequency that dumping syndrome occurs, you know, because everyone's body is so completely unique, and while it is the same surgery that's applied to everyone, this can present in different ways and different frequencies. So for example, one person might experience dumping syndrome every few months, and another person may be experiencing dumping syndrome every single day, multiple times a day. Let's talk about the impact, the psychological impact that the way in which dumping syndrome is spoken about can have on people who A, experience dumping syndrome post-surgery, or B, don't experience dumping syndrome post-surgery. First of all, let's have a little look to the people who do experience dumping syndrome post-surgery. let's call a spade, dumping syndrome is horrendous. Imagine experiencing this overwhelming palpitations, you're getting hot, you're getting sweaty, you're rushing to the bathroom, you can't predict whether it's going to happen. Sometimes it's a little bit more predictable and you know what kind of foods it happens in response to. Sometimes it can feel completely unpredictable and you don't know if you're out with friends whether you may have this kind of reaction. For people who do experience dumping syndrome, it can be an incredible source of anxiety and it can start to encourage people to isolate and withdraw from social situations as well. However, when we're talking about the psychological impact of dumping syndrome and the fact that it's sold as this symptom which can help you to lose weight, some people may tolerate high frequencies and high intensities of dumping syndrome because of the weight loss that is either achieved or promised. So depending on your individual bariatric surgery journey and how intensely you experience dumping syndrome and how it impacts you, because two people could be experiencing the same frequency of dumping syndrome, the same intensity, but they may interact with it or cope with it very differently, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with coping with these different symptoms differently. What matters is how it affects you. So you may have, in the first category, you may have someone who experiences dumping syndrome and it may be to a high frequency and high intensity, but they may think, you know what, this is worth it because of the weight I've lost. Or you may have someone who is experiencing it to a similar or a lesser frequency or a more increased frequency and intensity, who is thinking, why did I ever get this surgery and this is not worth it. Then you've got another camp of people, and this is the 50% of people who had the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass who do not experience dumping syndrome, or people who have had a different form of bariatric surgery who don't experience dumping syndrome. For the people who are in this category, who lose weight and feel comfortable in their bodies and have body acceptance, they may not pay attention to whether or not they have dumping syndrome, and they probably will be content and happy in the fact that they don't have dumping syndrome. However, there is a group of people who almost mourn the fact that they don't have dumping syndrome because it has been promised as this additional way to lose weight. And what we do know about bariatric surgery is that it doesn't work for everyone. And if you're someone who hasn't quite lost the weight that you had expected following bariatric surgery, it is not your fault. It's just that the surgery didn't work as it had promised to work. But in this case, sometimes there are people who are sad or a little bit down that they don't experience the dumping syndrome because of the promise of weight loss, because they feel like they're missing out on that extra ability to lose weight. And that is something that's really complex as well. And that is something that is worth unpacking and looking into, and having a little reflection about, well, if you were to experience dumping syndrome symptoms, how that would change your life. For all three groups, people who have dumping syndrome and feel like no matter if it's impacting them to a negative extent or a serious extent, they feel that it's worth it because of how they're able to move through society now, or whether the surgery has had an impact to their health, or whether you're in the category of people who, yes, have dumping syndrome, but it may be to a greater or lesser extent, but it is not perceived to be worth it because of the impact that it's having to you on a regular basis. Or if you're in the third camp of people who don't experience dumping syndrome but wish they did and are sad about the weight that they potentially could have lost if they had dumping syndrome, I would offer my compassion to all of the people in these groups and to the experiences that you're living at this moment in time. None of these experiences are easy, and I would encourage, if you can, to offer yourself some compassion in this time as well. I would also encourage you to have a think about what practical steps, if you're someone who does experience dumping syndrome, what practical steps that you can take on in order to alleviate the dumping syndrome. Now, there are obviously surgical responses, surgical revisions or alterations in terms of your bariatric surgery, and that would be something that you'd need to discuss with the surgical team if that's something you're considering. There are also medications as well to consider if you're experiencing dumping syndrome. In terms of dietary advice, there are simple dietary advice, having your regular meals, making sure you're including balance, making sure you're getting the fats in there. But the thing with the dietary advice is that it's not always possible to follow it. Despite having surgery, you may still be able to tolerate, or you may still have a desire for an ice cream, or you may still desire to have jelly babies, or whatever it is that results in the dumping syndrome. And if you still desire that and seek that, even though it's having negative impacts to your digestive system, that is not your fault. And that is something that you deserve compassionate support for, because truly healing your relationship with food can help you with your dumping syndrome. And if this is something that you would like support with, I offer consultations for people following bariatric surgery, but also people in general, to help heal their relationship with food in their body. And this can be incredibly helpful in terms of regulating how much you're eating, because it's going into the root cause of whatever eating pattern is going on, instead of, you know, slapping on, maybe you should try eating less of that, because how helpful is that kind of advice, right? In conclusion, dumping syndrome involves a series of symptoms, and it's unique to the individual. It can involve things like your digestive system symptoms, rushing to the bathroom, as well as the circulatory system, you know, feeling faint, palpitations, this urgent need to lie down. You deserve support if this is impacting you to a point where it is negatively affecting you. You find that you're not able to go out in social situations, you're not feeling well in yourself, it's getting you down. You deserve support. So I'd encourage you to either reach out to your bariatric team, or you can always give me a shout as well. And there are ways of looking at this and supporting this. And again, it's not your fault if you do have dumping syndrome. It's not your fault if you don't have dumping syndrome. And if you do have dumping syndrome in response to a food that you feel like you just can't stop eating, then simply receiving advice such as stop eating that thing is not going to work. You need someone who's going to support you to make real foundational changes and lay true blocks for healing and change. If you experience dumping syndrome, or if you relate or don't relate to anything that I've spoken about today, feel free to pop them in the comments below. I love reading your experiences, your thoughts, and as always, if you can like, subscribe, all the good stuff, it's always appreciated. And other than that, I'll see you in the next one.